You decided to cut my salary in half. Well, then say goodbye to your business. This happened early in my career in programming, sometime in 2005 or 2006. I had just been fired from my previous job because I strictly followed the instructions I was given, and in the end, I ended up getting myself in trouble. I was a young guy who had dropped out of college, and technically that meant I owed student loans to banks and private companies. The debts were approaching their due date, and I was still paying off the loan for my first car, which was a clunker but mine. By the time I bought it, the previous owners had almost ruined it. It was 4 years old and had almost 320,000 kilometers on the odometer when I bought it. And of course, there was rent and utilities to pay. At my last job, I was paid well below the market average, so I lived paycheck to paycheck, but I was too green as a specialist to have any other choice. I lived not far from Los Angeles, where the cost of living was such that every month I had to decide which bills to pay and which ones could wait. I specifically lived in San Pedro, a small and somewhat secluded town. After I sent my resume to all possible job boards, I finally got a call from a startup. They seemed to like my resume and invited me for an in-person interview. They didn't even call to confirm at first. I was desperate, so I agreed. They gave me the address in Woodland Hills. I checked online and it was a 55-minute drive, assuming there was no traffic. With traffic, it would be about 1 hour 45 minutes one way. But I had no choice. No one else was responding to my resume, so I went. I arrived at the location, and the office complex was almost empty. There were 6 or 7 cars in a parking lot that could hold at least 50. I entered the building, called the number they gave me to announce my arrival, and Chad appeared. He greeted me joyfully as if I were bringing him a message from heaven. He led me to the office. It seemed like there was no one else in the building except for us. He told me about the company and said that he had written the software they sold, but it wasn't scalable, and they needed someone to rewrite it from scratch. We went through the whole interview ritual, and he immediately offered me the job. The salary was slightly higher than my previous job, so I thought it would cover the gas. I agreed. We shook hands, and I was supposed to start on Monday. The red flag started from the very first minute of my first day on Monday. First, they gave me a tour, which consisted of showing me a 4x4 meter room that I was supposed to share with Chad and another engineer who was supposed to start work the following Monday. I don't like it when someone can look over my shoulder. It makes me nervous. I asked why every engineer had 2 computers, and they told me that the computer I'd be using to write code had no internet access for security reasons. Note, this was pure paranoia. There was nothing in the software that required such secrecy. No government contracts or anything like that. They then took me through the entire building, introduced me to Richard, Eddie, and the sales and tech support teams. They explained that half the team supports the current version of the application, 2 people are trying to sell it to new clients, and 1 person is specifically dedicated to selling the new version, the one I hadn't even started developing yet. I was young and naive, but even I could tell that the salesperson was probably already promising clients deadlines for when the product would be ready. It's great that you're starting now. We've already promised clients that everything will be ready by June. I mentioned that it was only February, so I had just agreed to rewrite, test, and build the entire application from scratch, which I hadn't even seen in about 4 months. After the tour, I sat down to work, going through many hurdles to install the required software and load the code. I started going through the horribly written code, and I had never seen such a mess before. There were no comments in it at all, but before I could ask the CTO any questions, he told me he was going downtown to sell tickets to a Lakers game, and that we would meet tomorrow. So, I was left alone in the office with this mess of a machine, which had been butchered, and my only consolation was that at least I was back in the game. Fast forward a week. I had documented most of the code because no one else had done it, and my relationship with the boss was clearly not going well. He was angry that I hadn't written anything substantial, and I was just dumbfounded because I was trying to understand what the specific code was doing. The boss consistently left around noon to sell tickets or didn't show up at all because he was chatting somewhere. When he was actually in the office, I showed him my documentation and asked him to confirm or explain the pieces of code that confused me, which were clearly a mess. By the end of the week, I had documented about 30% of the project. I started leaving after sunset so I could get more done and avoid the traffic and the heat in the car since the air conditioning didn't work. I barely managed to convince the CTO that this work was necessary so that the engineer who was supposed to start on Monday wouldn't go through the same hell I went through. This would make our work much more efficient. Monday came, and Big Bro arrived. I call him Big Bro because he was much more experienced than I was. The first day was spent setting up his workstation, and then we went through my documentation. He managed to answer the questions that the CTO never bothered to answer, simply because the guy actually knew his stuff, and I started feeling more confident. Over the next few weeks, Big Bro took me under his wing, teaching me, guiding me on where my ideas were good and where they could be improved. If it weren't for him, I would have just lost it. I even started going on smoke breaks with him, even though I don't smoke, just to get some fresh air outside the office. We discussed the project, and we also became friends with Eddie, who entertained us with stories about the CTO and SEO. April came, and I needed to take a day off for a special occasion, which fell on a Wednesday. I had told Chad about this when I was hired, and he took it well. I reminded him about it on April 2nd, and he completely flipped out. He started hysterically saying he regretted hiring me, claiming I didn't have the skills I said I had and that I wasn't worth the money I was being paid. We hadn't even reached half of the project. Maybe about a third was ready, and it was already decided that June was out of the question. Now we were aiming for August. I came in every day at 9 a.m. and left around 10 p.m., pushing myself to the limit. Big Bro and Eddie stayed with us because we liked hanging out together, so it's not hard to guess that I was on the verge of losing it. In a tense but diplomatic tone, I said that if he invested in the project as much as we did in rewriting the code, we would already be much closer to the finish line, especially considering our 12-hour shifts. Chad, to put it mildly, didn't like that and started yelling at us about lost sales and returns due to delays. He said the only way he would leave us alone was if we finished the project. During all this time, Big Bro just sat silently and didn't say a word to support me. Then, Chad left the office, and I simply said I was going for lunch and would be back in an hour. I felt completely drained by Chad and betrayed by Big Bro, who, as I thought, should have supported me since we were in the same boat. When we both returned to the office, Chad apologized for his outburst and said that since he had originally agreed to my day off, everything was still good. Great. I also apologized, though I didn't have anything to apologize for. I just didn't want to talk to him anymore, so I decided that was the quickest way to end the conversation. Then came my chance for deliberate subjugation. For the past 2 months, Chad had been getting worse and worse. He was yelling almost every day and still leaving work early. Big Bro and Eddie also felt the brunt of his ego. No one was safe from him. Our most productive time was during the smoke breaks and the second half of the day, especially the evenings, because before Chad left, it was impossible to focus. The first Monday in June, Chad invited me for a walk. I thought he was going to fire me. By then, we had already had to completely rework the rewritten application because the original lacked a critical component, and we only had about 60% of it ready. The August release was looking less and less realistic. Chad said he had hired a third engineer, but to keep within budget and pay him, he was cutting my salary in half. I stopped and just stared at him in complete disbelief. "Are you serious?" I asked. "I'm barely covering my bills and gas for the drive. If you cut my salary even a little, I won't be able to live." At that moment, it didn't even occur to me that it would also reduce my productivity because so much time would be spent adapting a new guy, and that was a serious problem. Chad brushed it off, saying, "It's not my problem. The problem is that you missed one deadline, and it looks like you'll miss another one. If you don't like it, go find another job." And with that, he went back into the office. I was just informed that I had 2 weeks left at my current salary. Okay, that day, I did what I hadn't done from the very beginning. I left work before sunset at 5 p.m. I got into my car, which had no air conditioning, and had been sitting under the hot sun all day. I felt like a damn baked potato. I drove through traffic for an hour and a half through the scorching Los Angeles heat, got home, updated my resume, and activated accounts on all the job search websites. The very next day, a potential employer contacted me, and we scheduled an interview. I decided to tell Big Bro about this, and he gave me some news that showed how small the world really is. I said, "Hey, Big Bro, just to let you know, I've started looking for a new job. I already have one interview scheduled." Big Bro was like, "Seriously, where?" I said, "At this place and that place." Big Bro replied, "Wow, I used to work there before I came here. It's a great place, and I left on good terms. I know their CTO, so feel free to use me as a reference." I skeptically said, "Okay, sure." It turned out that Big Bro really kept his word. During my interview with the new CTO, we even discussed Big Bro. It turns out they had already talked about me beforehand, and Big Bro confirmed everything I said about why I was looking for a new job and how things were going. The interview went great, and by Friday afternoon, I electronically signed the offer. By then, Chad had already gone home, so no one was watching me while I was signing on the work computer, which had internet access. At my new job, the commute was less than half the time it used to take, and the salary was significantly higher. During the last smoke break, I still don't smoke, I told Big Bro and Eddie that I was leaving because I found a new place. Strangely, both of them just smiled and wished me good luck. No hard feelings. I hope we'll stay in touch. It was unusual, but I honestly didn't care about anything related to that job anymore, so I didn't give it much thought. I went inside, packed my stuff into my backpack, and went to see the CTO. I I said, "Hi, Richard. Got a minute?" Richard replied, "Hi, what's up?" I said, "I just wanted to let you know that I found a new job, so I'm leaving." Richard said, "Seriously? Why? We were rooting for you." I said, "Well, you decided to cut my salary to a point where I can't even survive." Chad said if I didn't like it, I could look for something else, so I did. Richard lowered his head, and I said, "When's my last day?" Richard, now irritated, said, "We need you to train the new guy. He starts soon." I said, "Hey, I trained myself, and Big Bro was new too. He'll figure it out." With that, I left for greener pastures. Unexpected consequences. 4 months later, Big Bro messaged me and asked how things were going. I replied that everything was great and we agreed to catch up during lunch. It seems like everything had gone downhill for them. Part 1. Apparently, on Monday, Chad came into the office absolutely furious. He immediately demanded Eddie reinstall the system on my old work computer, which of course erased everything I had left on it. Big Bro came in an hour later, and he and Chad discussed the new project schedule. During the process, Big Bro asked Chad to log in under the admin account on my old computer to get the documents related to architecture, code, meeting notes, etc. Chad responded by punching the wall and left for the whole day, probably to go to the hospital to treat his hand. The rest of the week, Big Bro supposedly worked on restoring all the documentation from scratch. Part 2, when I asked how the new guy did with the documentation, Big Bro laughed and said there was no documentation at all. Apparently, over the months we worked there, Big Bro and Eddie became so close that a month before I left, they started renting a place together. Moreover, they decided to start their own business as freelancers and consultants, and all they had to do was choose the right moment to make it their full-time job. Neither of them could stand Chad, and they both wanted to make his departure as painful as possible. So, they decided that Big Bro's last day would be the day before the new guy started, and Eddie would quit a little later, but stay to personally watch how everything blew up. I mentioned that Big Bro didn't tell Chad he was quitting. He just didn't show up that Monday. However, he did send Chad the documentation he supposedly worked on all week. It turned out he didn't document any code. Instead, he wrote a detailed expose letter. Why Chad is a terrible boss, and sent it to all the employees. I asked if he kept a copy so I could read it, and he sent it to me after the call. As a true assistant, Eddie made sure the new guy had a work email and was added to all the necessary mailing lists. So, the first email he received in the company was literally a warning about what kind of boss he was about to work for. Chad, as reported, decided that the best thing he could do was vent his anger on the new guy. The new guy, by the way, managed to read most of the letter before Chad pushed him away from his workstation and deleted the email. The new guy, not thinking long, and quite reasonably, decided it was a mistake to work for Chad. He gathered his things and quit on the spot. Part 3. With the new guy gone, the August release turned into a mirage within a mirage. And according to Eddie, that didn't stop Chad and Richard from trying to find that one rockstar engineer who could save them from their own mistakes. However, judging by the salary they were offering, such a person simply didn't exist. Time passed, and by August, clients realized they paid for something they never got, and almost all of them demanded refunds. Some even sued. Due to the amount of returns and lawyer fees, and because of how they structured the company, they were personally liable and they just didn't have the money left. Their business had to be closed. Lastly, for the fellow developers who are curious how bad the application was, it was one single PHP file with over 40,000 lines of code, running inside a loop. All the logic was built using trees of ifs leading to other ifs or new loops. There were no function calls or external libraries, just spaghetti at its worst. Because of the nature of the application, critical logic had to be implemented in no less than 7 different places, depending on when the execution required it. The deepest nesting by tabs reached 19 or 20 levels.